Understanding the NFL. Times is changing in the NFL. The era of the elite Hall of Fame QB dominating the league, the playoffs, and winning the Super Bowl every single season has come to an end. Now, this has kind of been developing for some time. You can think about some teams like the Nick Foles team. It's not been every single season that the Super Bowl caliber player, but it's always been at least in the Super Bowl. It's been either the MVP caliber player, the Hall of Fame quarterback, the elite quarterback that's always in there, whether they're winning or whether they're losing. But now, more than ever, times are changing. Let's go ahead and give you recent examples. A perfect example, think about the best player, blessed quarterback of this era. Patrick Mahomes. When he first came into the league, he set a full first year behind Alex Smith. Second season, he takes the league by storm. And you got to think about the entire Mahomes era. Split it into two different divisions. Pre-Tyreek Hill leaving, post-Tyreek Hill leaving. Now, we may be starting to develop a whole new division, but we're going to get into that later in the video. First season, lose to Brady. Comes down to some controversial calls, but they lose to Brady. The next season, they make it to the Super Bowl. They beat the 49ers. The next season, get obliterated in the Super Bowl by the Tampa Bay Bucks with Brady. The next season, they lose to Burrow. Now, you lose Tyreek Hill. The next season, that's probably the most balanced team that Mahomes has ever had. When you think about, at the time, Kelce was still looked at as like this elite tight end. The scheme was still cooking. You know what I'm saying? Mahomes was still playing, but you could tell there was a difference offensively in how they played. It was a lot more dump-offs. It was a lot more intermediate. It was a lot smarter offense. Not as many deep shots, not as much risk-taking, and their defense was developing. And after that Buccaneers, they put a lot more emphasis on building the team offensive line and defensively. Then the next season, you see Mahomes and Kelce regress a little bit. Now, Mahomes, you could really make the argument it's more so because outside of Kelce going into that year, it really wasn't much for him to have. But offensive line was very good. The defense goes on to have one of the best playoff performances of all time throughout the entire run. And it just becomes a much more defensively slanted team. Offense kind of fell off a cliff, but it really didn't matter because they had an all-time defense postseason while also having Mahomes, who was just doing enough to win the big games when it mattered most. Then the next season, Chiefs start slanting offensively again, start to lose key defensive guys. You start to lose key defensive guys. Win every one-score game and get obliterated in the Super Bowl by the Eagles. Now, when it comes to the Eagles, we're going to talk about that later in terms of how they built their team. I got a whole different diagram of how they've built their team up to be what it is. But in this point of the video, when we talk about the QBs, let's talk about the adversaries that you can say for Mahomes. You got guys like Josh Allen. I honestly don't really have a full explanation to why they just lose, but this has just been in the Bills' history. I do think there is a thing about a team's history. When you think about the Bears with quarterbacks, when you think about the Bills, it's kind of the playoff success. They made it to the Super Bowl 4 straight times. They didn't win one. You know how hard that it is to do? 4 straight times they didn't win one. Now, usually what has happened in this regime is that they lose in the playoffs to the Chiefs. And Andy Reid thoroughly, most likely, outcoached McDermott. This time, no Mahomes, and it comes down to it comes down to Josh Allen, and Josh Allen just doesn't hold his end of the bargain, goes out there and has 4 turnovers, still scored 30 points, but at the end of the day, it does come down to the last play being a pick, whether controversial or not, maybe some calls controversial. End of the day, Josh Allen ended the regulation. He missed a couple throws as well, forget just the turnovers. He just didn't have a great game for his standards, and that was kind of the difference in the game. Then, another person, Lamar Jackson. At this point, I know that Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, it's like a little clash. But at this point, Lamar Jackson is just like the Peyton Manning of this era, where he's going to have these crazy regular seasons. But in the playoffs, he's just going to not be that caliber at all. It's just what it is. Now, there's a way that you can build a team around that. I think there is a little bit more explainable things that's happened, like last year where he has those turnovers. It still doesn't really come down to those turnovers at the end of the day. You could, if he doesn't have one of those turnovers, maybe it's the difference, but also the Mark Andrews fumbles hurt, and then you have the drop on the 2-point conversion to tie the game. So there are some different things. 2023 will be the biggest one. I would say is more so kind of questionable because Lamar Jackson wasn't good in that game, but you also could say it's not all his fault because the defense second half, they only allowed 0 points to that Chiefs team I mentioned earlier, but you got guys fumbling at the 1-yard line. It just kind of similar to the Bills, finding different ways to lose in these years, but also at the end of the day, Lamar kind of just not playing to that standard that he's setting in the regular season for some of these seasons. Then we have Joe Burrow, where you have the injuries, but also he might be a perfect example of terrible team construction. And honestly, you could kind of compare him to early Mahomes, where Mahomes early on, he had the weapons. Was his O-line that great? Was his defense that great? You know, such and such. Then, think about the elite quarterbacks. Majority of the best quarterbacks has replaced the mind part of the game with athleticism. So it's just going to be more regular for these players to drop against certain schemes and defenses the more these players are slanted like this. Now, the way that you could take up for that is by having ridiculously good offensive schemes around these quarterbacks. Where have teams adapted? Teams have adapted schemes, and offensively and defensively has become more important than ever. Teams nowadays also build teams towards schemes more than ever due to analytics and more info and knowledge, and instead of just picking players regardless of schemes that may not even fit your scheme. Teams have just started to almost build perfect teams. For examples, look at the Eagles these last 4 years. Look at the situation that they've had. Now, have they had this team all of these? No. They've been building this up for time now, even without these last 4 years. But think about it. First year, they make the Super Bowl, lose to the Chiefs by 3. You can really say the fumble from Hurts was the difference in the game, but Hurts was phenomenal in that game. Ends up going down, losing to that Chiefs team 38-35. Like I said earlier, though, that was probably the most balanced Chiefs team that has been since the Tyreek, I guess, post-Tyreek leaving. Now, the next season, they lose both coordinators. They actually have a pretty solid start to the season. It kind of starts to fall apart towards the end, and they lose in the wild card. The next season, they get 2 new coordinators that both work, and they go to the Super Bowl. But at this point, they have been building a team. Like I said, they have been building a team year in, year out, regardless of how well they was finishing, and they were starting to get better teams. So at this point, you had a good quarterback, an amazing O-line, a really good wide receiver duo. At this point, arguably the best running back in the league. And defensively, your defense was amazing. You even had depth at defensive tackle, depth at edge. Really, maybe your linebackers was even a weakness, but at that point, your linebacker was really good at that point with Zach Bond. And then defensively, in the back end, I guess you had a really good cornerback trio, mainly more of a cornerback duo, but Slay was actually really good that year, and your safeties was actually really good. So honestly, the Eagles, even without the coordinators up to this point, had built damn near the perfect team. And then put on to it that you also had finally got your coordinators right at the right time. They go on to go through the season, have a little struggle to start. They start making some changes, adapting. They start winning games more consistently. Quarterback may have been struggling, but they get to the playoffs, still maybe struggling a little bit. They get to the last 2 games of the season. He puts his best 2 games of the season at the right time, and they go on and win the Super Bowl. Like I said, they obliterated the Chiefs. They have a much better team than the Chiefs. Did they have a better quarterback? No. In that game, though, who was the better quarterback? Hurts. He was. The Chiefs didn't even cross the 50 in the first half. It took all the way to like midway through the third. The Eagles were just dominant that year. But this is where the margins for error comes into play. You see, the first time they make the Super Bowl, they lose both coordinators. Next season, they lose in the wild card. After winning the Super Bowl, they don't even lose both coordinators. A lot of the guys that they have are kind of young. They lose guys, but they don't lose the main guys. The main guy they may have lost was maybe Milton Williams for the most part. But overall, they lose their offensive coordinator, and they lose in the wild card again. Teams have almost started to build perfect teams, and the margin for error is just more important than ever. Whether you have run game to make it easier for your quarterback, or a good O-line, or a good defense, or amazing coaching, or a GM that's amazing at building rosters. Margin for error is more important than ever. But yeah, that's the video. That's going to be understanding the NFL. I was going to do a little bit more details about how you got guys, just a perfect example is this year. You got guys like Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh, both getting fired. Clear leader of men. They have success in the league. They've been proven head coaches. I think the Harbaugh firing is like, you got us this far, we need somebody to take us past this. I think Harbaugh's a good coach. I don't think he's as proven as a leader of men or a motivator as Mike Tomlin. But I think that's like they need a guy that's just going to take them beyond where they are right now in their eyes. I don't really agree with the firing, but when you think about what do these coaches bring to the table, it's more than ever you're going to most likely sign an offensive slanted guy or a defensive slanted guy. And Lord willing, this offensive slanted guy knows how to get the right coaching staff around him. Lord willing, that, I guess, guru, I'm not going to say offensive slanted guy because it works both ways. He knows how to get the right players to fit within his scheme. And Lord willing, he also has a good relationship with your GM and all this type of stuff. And also, you got the part where some of these offensive or defensive slanted guys can also be a very good motivator, a very good leader of men. So, it's really, really tough. In my opinion, if you are going to fire some of these head coaches, I do think you need to have a replacement. And that's where it comes down with Sean McDermott. I think Tomlin was a terrible firing in my opinion, but it makes sense at the end of the day because he was such a good coach. At a certain point, he was holding the team back from able to get the talent that he needed to succeed. So they were always never going to just have a negative season. He's always going to get them to the playoffs or just have at least minimum 9 wins. They changed the schedule, and he still was never having negative seasons. It's just what it was. But that would hurt them in terms of the talent perspective because they could never draft that high. That's why when I do the mock drafts, I'm always like, when the hell are they ever going to be in position to get a player of this caliber? When? When is it going to happen? So, it's just tough. It's just tough with Mike Tomlin. I do think he kind of was holding them back from able to get to a certain point because at the end of the day, he's that good in the regular season, but the talent wasn't good enough to win playoff games. And I don't really think that was his fault, but at the same time, it kind of was because they were over-exceeding expectations every single year in the regular season. And that was hurting their playoff expectations, but also hurting their draft pick expectations. So, it's tough. And then you got McDermott, like I mentioned. He's a defensive slanted guy that also ended up being a leader of men, a good motivator. But kind of similar to Harbaugh, this is a thing that in previous years with Andy Reid, you could give him the blame. This year, it's just weird because it wasn't his fault. It was Josh Allen's fault. Josh Allen, at the end of the day, with the way that the Bills have built their team, it's just not been great GMing. He's had to be a hero. And when you have to be a hero, you're going to have games like this. In previous years, it was a lot of people talking about the stats with Josh Allen where he had like the highest turnover to touchdown ratio. Josh Allen he ain't changed the way he played at all. He's always been a risk-taking guy. He just a risk reward. Or every risk there's reward. He had been getting the rewards for the most part. Maybe not beating the Chiefs, but majority of the time he was having fantastic games. You kind of seen when that risk don't really get you that reward, what it looked like. You get 4 turnovers and you get one of the craziest turnovers at the end of half that really kind of come back to bite you at the end of the day. So the fact that he got fired this year is crazy, but I would put his in the same tier as the Harbaugh, where this is not firing. That's probably just trying to get you to that next tier. It just don't make sense to do it now. But also, if you gonna fire him, how you don't fire the GM? But that's a topic for another day. Like I said, at the end of the day, it's about understanding the NFL. Different margins for error for every different team. Every team is not built the same way. Certain quarterbacks, you can't build the team to be the same way. Certain schemes, you can't build the team to be the same way. But at the end of the day, as long as it's about understanding the NFL, understanding your team, understanding your scheme, understanding what your team needs and all that type of stuff. But yeah, we're going to be doing these mock drafts. We're going to be doing more videos as the playoffs is going on. I don't know if this is coming out before the championship round or after. Time we're recording this, I am not knowledgeable what happened. Hopefully the Patriots win. But yeah, that's going to be the video. If y'all do want more of these discussion videos, like the video, subscribe, all that good stuff out the way, man. It's your boy Fitz. I'm out of here.
Tell them to bring me my money. Yeah!